I grew up in a place where the nights always felt longer than they should. A small town where the biggest noise after dark came from crickets or the occasional dog barking at shadows. People rarely locked their doors, and when they did, it wasn't out of fear, more out of habit. When I was 29, I rented a small house on the edge of town. It was a cheap place, a little rundown, but it sat right at the end of a dead-end road with nothing but open fields behind it. From my front porch, I could see across to another house, about 200 yards away. It was a larger place, an old farmhouse that looked like it hadn't been taken care of in years. The windows were always dark, the grass knee-high, the porch sagging. People in town said it was empty, but I learned pretty quickly that it wasn't. The first few nights I stayed there were uneventful. I worked at a local auto shop during the day, came home tired, and usually went to bed early. But one night, sometime after midnight, I woke up to a noise. It was faint at first, just the creak of wood, like someone stepping on an old porch. I thought it was my own house settling until I realized it wasn't coming from me. It was coming from across the field. I got out of bed, went to the window, and looked through the thin curtains. That farmhouse, the one that was supposed to be empty, had a light flickering inside. Not steady, more like the glow of a candle or lantern. I stood there watching for a long time, half asleep, trying to convince myself it didn't matter. Maybe someone had finally moved in. Maybe it was just kids messing around. Still, something about it didn't sit right. The light kept shifting, moving from one window to another, like someone was walking slowly through the house. The next morning, I mentioned it to my landlord when he came by to drop off some mail that had been misdelivered. He looked at me with a frown. That place? Nobody's supposed to be living there. Been empty for years. Maybe someone's squatting? I asked. Maybe, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. That night, I couldn't stop myself from looking again. Just after midnight, the same flickering light appeared, moving from room to room, and then I noticed something that froze me in place. A figure standing at the upstairs window, looking straight across the field, looking at me. I backed away from my own window so fast I nearly tripped. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, just sat in my chair with the TV on low for noise, glancing every few minutes to make sure the figure wasn't there anymore. The following day, I told one of the guys at work. He laughed it off, said I was imagining things. That house has been empty since I was a kid. If anyone's there, they don't belong. By the third night, I was on edge before I even went to bed. Sure enough, around midnight, the flicker returned. Only this time, it wasn't confined to the farmhouse. This time, I heard it. A sound outside my own window. It was soft at first, like footsteps in the grass, then a slow drag across the siding of my house. I didn't even breathe. I just sat frozen in the dark, heart hammering, listening as whoever it was circled my home. Finally, I grabbed the phone and dialed the sheriff's office. When the deputy arrived, he searched around the property but didn't find anything. No footprints, no sign of anyone. He told me maybe it was just an animal. But animals don't stop to knock. Because that's what I heard just as the deputy drove away. A single knock on the back door. I didn't open it. I didn't even move until the first gray light of dawn crept across the field. The nights after that were worse. Some nights I'd hear the dragging sound, other nights faint tapping on the glass. Sometimes I swore I saw someone standing at the edge of the field, too far to make out details but close enough that I knew I wasn't imagining it. I started sleeping with a hammer next to my bed, though sleep became rare. I thought about moving, breaking the lease, anything, but part of me didn't want to give whoever it was the satisfaction. One night, though, it all came to a head. Around 1 a.m, I woke to the sound of my front door handle turning, slowly, like someone testing it. My body went cold. I grabbed the hammer and crept into the living room, every floorboard betraying me with a creak. The handle rattled again, harder this time, and then came a voice. "Let me in." I froze. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. Just calm, steady, like they'd been there before and expected me to open up. I stood there in the dark, clutching the hammer, staring at the door. The voice came again. "You don't belong here." That broke something in me. I yelled, loud enough to wake the neighbors if there had been any nearby. I shouted that I was calling the police, that I had a weapon. The rattling stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I waited, heart thundering, but the voice didn't return. Eventually, I peeked out the window. The field across the way was empty. The farmhouse was dark. By morning, I'd packed my bags. I didn't care about the lease anymore. I couldn't stay. When I left, I drove past the old farmhouse one last time. In the daylight, it looked just as empty as it always had. Windows boarded, porch sagging. But as I passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone inside was watching me go. I moved out that same day, never looked back. But even now, years later, whenever I see an empty house in some small town, I think about that night. The knock, the voice, the feeling that someone out there decided I didn't belong. And I wonder if they ever found someone else who did. When I was 27, I worked nights at a small gas station on the edge of town. It wasn't much, 2 pumps, a tiny store with buzzing fluorescent lights, and a back office that smelled like old coffee and cigarette smoke. Most nights were dead quiet. I'd sit behind the counter, reading or scrolling my phone, waiting for the occasional car to roll in. The thing about small-town night shifts is that you learn to recognize everyone. Regulars come at the same times, buy the same things, say the same tired jokes. It's predictable, and predictability is comforting when you're alone at 3 in the morning. But one night, a car I didn't recognize pulled in. It was around 1:30 a.m. I was behind the counter, half asleep, when headlights washed over the windows. A black sedan rolled up to the pump and just sat there, engine running. Nobody got out. At first I figured they were on the phone or digging through their wallet, but after a couple minutes I started to feel uneasy. Something about the way the car sat there, idling, lights on, felt wrong. Finally, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, thin, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't go straight to the pump. Instead, he stood there, staring at the store. I pretended to busy myself behind the counter, but I could feel his eyes through the glass. After a long moment, he walked inside. The bell above the door jingled, breaking the silence. "Evening," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer. He just walked slowly down one aisle, then another, not picking anything up. Every few steps, he glanced at me. When he finally came to the counter, he didn't have anything in his hands. He just leaned forward slightly and asked, "You here alone?" My throat tightened. I forced a smile and shook my head. "No, my coworker's in the back." That was a lie. There was no coworker, just me. The man stared at me for a long second, then smiled, too wide, like he knew I was lying. "Long night, huh?" he said. "Yeah," I muttered, pretending to check something on the register. He stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked out. I watched him through the window as he got back into his car. He didn't pump gas. He didn't buy anything. He just sat there with the engine running. Minutes dragged by. My nerves were shot, every sound magnified in the stillness. Finally, the sedan pulled away, slowly, like he wasn't in a hurry. I let out a shaky breath, told myself it was over, but it wasn't. About an hour later, I noticed the same headlights again. The black sedan had parked across the road this time, engine off, just sitting there in the dark. I couldn't see the driver, but I knew he was watching. I locked the doors, something we usually didn't bother with in that town. My manager would have been annoyed, but I didn't care. I kept glancing out the window, heart racing, waiting for him to move. He sat there for almost 2 hours. Didn't get out, didn't turn the car back on, just sat. Around 4, I finally called the sheriff's office. A deputy showed up 15 minutes later, but by the time he arrived, the sedan was gone. The deputy looked around, shrugged, and told me to call again if he came back. He made it sound like I was overreacting, but I knew what I'd seen. For the next few nights, nothing happened. I started to think maybe it was just some drifter passing through. But on Friday, right around the same time, the black sedan returned. This time, it didn't stop at the pumps. It pulled around back. I heard the engine cut off, then silence. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The nearest house was a mile away, and my car was parked right next to where he'd stopped. Then came the sound, footsteps on the gravel behind the store. Slow, deliberate. I grabbed the phone, hands shaking, and dialed the sheriff again. As I waited for them to pick up, the footsteps stopped right outside the back door. The thin metal door rattled, like someone testing the handle. I whispered into the phone that someone was trying to get in. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line. that a unit was on the way. The rattling stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the sharp scrape of metal against the lock, like he was trying to pick it. I pressed myself against the counter, gripping the phone so tight it hurt. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The footsteps retreated. A car door slammed. The sedan roared back to life and peeled away into the night. By the time the deputy arrived, the lot was empty. No footprints, no car, nothing but tire marks in the gravel. I finished that shift, but it was the last night I worked there. I quit the next day. Some things aren't worth the paycheck. Even now, years later, whenever I drive past an all-night gas station, I think about that man, the way he looked at me, the way he lingered, the way he asked if I was alone, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd told him the truth. I was 26 when I rented a basement apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and 2 windows that sat just above ground level. I picked it because the rent was cheap, and the landlord didn't ask many questions. The town itself was quiet, especially at night. After 9, the streets went dead. I worked evening shifts at a small restaurant, so most nights I'd come home after midnight, heat something up, and collapse into bed. The first night I noticed him, it was just a shadow. I was lying in bed, the curtains half open, when I saw movement at the window, a quick blur, like someone walking past. I sat up, heart thudding, but when I looked closer, there was nothing there, just the faint glow of the street lamp across the road. I told myself it was my imagination, the tricks of being overtired. The second night, it happened again. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it, faint tapping, like fingernails on glass. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth, and turned my head slowly toward the window. A face, just for a second, lit by the weak streetlight. A man's face, pale, eyes wide, staring in at me. I dropped the toothbrush and stumbled back, my whole body locked up. By the time I found the courage to move closer, the face was gone. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told my landlord. He frowned, said it was probably kids messing around. Nobody serious hangs around here, he told me. But I could tell he didn't really believe it. That evening, I went out and bought heavier curtains, pulled them tight before bed, tried to convince myself it was over. But around 2 in the morning, I woke up. Not from a sound, at least not one I could explain. It was the feeling, that prickling sense of being watched. I lay there in the dark, afraid to move. Then I heard it, breathing, not mine. Slow, steady, right outside the glass. I couldn't bring myself to look. I just pulled the blanket over my head like a scared kid. I stayed like that until daylight started creeping in. The days after that were worse. I'd come home from work and notice little things. The faint smear of a handprint on the outside of the window, mud on the sill. Once, even the smallest chip in the paint, like something sharp had dragged across it. I started staying at work longer, lingering in the break room, pretending I had things to finish, anything to avoid coming home. But eventually, I had to. The night, everything came to a head. It was raining. Heavy sheets of it, pounding on the glass so loud I almost missed the other sound. The scrape, like fingernails dragging slowly down the pane. I froze in the living room, TV still flickering, rain hammering outside. The scrape came again, and then, clear as day, the sound of someone whispering my name. I don't know how he knew it. Maybe he'd followed me home one night, maybe he'd asked around town. But hearing it in that soft, steady whisper broke something inside me. I grabbed the phone and called the sheriff. They said they'd send someone, but with the storm, it might take a while. The whispering didn't stop. It got louder, more insistent, like he knew I was listening. I couldn't make out the words after my name, just a low muttering that crawled under my skin. I backed into the bathroom, locked the door, and it sat on the floor with my back against it. I stayed there, clutching the phone, until finally I saw red and blue lights flashing through the curtain gap. By the time the deputy searched outside, the yard was empty, just muddy footprints leading away into the field behind the building. I moved out the next week. Didn't care about losing the deposit. Didn't care that people whispered about me being paranoid, because I know what I heard. And the thing that keeps me up at night isn't the memory of his face, or the whispering, or even the handprints on the glass. It's the thought that he knew my name. And maybe, wherever he is now, he still does. When you grow up in a small town, you learn all the back roads and shortcuts that cut through the woods or fields. Most of them are barely paved, just narrow stretches of cracked asphalt where grass grows through the middle. Locals use them to shave off a few minutes driving home, but outsiders never know they exist. I used to take one almost every night. It was a road that ran between the highway and the far edge of town. No lights, no houses, just trees pressing in close, the kind that make you feel boxed in even when your high beams are on. One night, coming home late from a friend's place, I decided to take it. It was close to 2 in the morning, and I just wanted to get home fast. The air was damp, fog curling low across the ground. My car's radio was out, so the only sound was the hum of the engine and the crackle of gravel under my tires. About halfway down the road, I saw it. A car pulled off to the side with its hazard lights blinking. It was an old sedan, paint dull, one headlight busted. At first I slowed down. Habit. You don't leave someone stranded out here if you can help it. But as I got closer, something felt off. The hood wasn't up. Nobody was standing outside, just the blinking hazards cutting through the fog. I rolled down my window a crack, slowing almost to a stop. "You okay?" I called out. No answer. I leaned forward, squinting. That's when I noticed the driver's door was wide open. I froze. Every instinct told me to keep driving, but my foot hesitated on the gas. What if someone was hurt? What if they needed help? Then I saw movement in the trees. A figure stepping back just far enough that the light caught the edge of their face. A man, tall, standing too still, watching. My stomach dropped. I hit the gas hard, tires spitting gravel as I shot past the car. In the rear view, I saw the man step fully onto the road, turning to watch me go. My heart hammered as I sped the rest of the way home, hands locked tight on the wheel. I didn't stop until I pulled into my driveway and slammed the locks down. I told myself it could have been nothing. Maybe he was just some guy waiting for help. Maybe I overreacted. But I couldn't shake the way he stood there, silent, unmoving, watching. The next night, I swore I wouldn't take the shortcut. But when the highway was blocked by an accident, I didn't have a choice. The car was there again, same spot, same hazards blinking in the fog. Only this time, the driver's door was closed. I didn't slow down. I kept my eyes forward, both hands gripping the wheel, pretending I didn't see it. But as I passed, I caught it out of the corner of my eye, someone sitting in the driver's seat, head turned toward me. When I glanced in the mirror, the hazards clicked off. The car's headlights blazed to life. He was following me. I floored it, the road twisting in sharp turns that my old sedan barely handled. His headlights stayed right behind me, too close, blinding in the mirror. Every corner I took, he matched. Every time I sped up, so did he. Finally, the road opened into town. I pulled straight into the gas station lot, slamming my car into park under the bright lights. The sedan slowed as it approached. For a moment, I thought he'd pull in too, but then it kept going, rolling past, disappearing into the night. I sat there shaking, gasping for air, staring down the empty road until my vision blurred. For weeks, I avoided the shortcut. I'd drive 10-15 extra minutes if it meant staying on the highway. But one night, curiosity got the better of me. I told myself I'd just drive past, see if the car was still there. It wasn't. The road was empty. But when I got home and pulled into my driveway, my headlights swept across the curb. Parked just a few houses down was the same sedan. No hazards, no driver in sight. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't sleep much at all for a long time. Eventually, the car disappeared. Maybe he moved on. Maybe he found someone else to stop for him on that road. But even now, whenever I see hazards blinking in the fog, I keep driving. Because I know better. Sometimes the car on the side of the road isn't broken down. Sometimes it's waiting. I was 28 when I bought a small house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a one-story with peeling paint and a sagging porch, but it was mine. The neighborhood was quiet. Retirees, young families, the kind of people who waved when you drove by. Nothing about the place felt dangerous. That's why I didn't think much about locking up. I'd keep the front door latched, sure, but half the time I'd forget the back. Everyone did. It was that kind of town. One night in late fall, I came home from work around 11. The air was cold, frost starting to creep across the lawns. I heated up leftovers, watched some TV, and finally went to bed around 1. Sometime after 2, I woke up to a sound. It wasn't loud, just the faint creak of wood. At first I thought it was the house settling, but then came another sound, the squeak of a hinge, the back door. I sat up, heart hammering, straining to listen. For a moment, silence. Then, footsteps, slow, careful, across the kitchen floor. Every hair on my body stood on end. Someone was in my house. I slid quietly out of bed, my bare feet freezing on the floor. The only thing I had nearby was a baseball bat leaning against the dresser. I grabbed it, gripping it so tight my knuckles ached. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They moved like they knew the layout, like they'd been there before. I thought about running out the front, but that would mean crossing the living room. Too much open space. Instead, I eased my bedroom door shut and pressed my ear against it, trying not to breathe. The sound of drawers opening, silverware clinking, papers rustling. He was going through my things. I dialed 911 with shaking hands, whispering into the phone that someone was inside. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, that a unit was on the way. But my town wasn't big. At that hour, there might only be one deputy on shift. He could be 10 minutes out, 15. I didn't know if I had that long. The footsteps moved again. Closer, right outside my door. The knob turned. I backed away fast, bat raised, heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. The knob rattled once, twice. Then silence. I stood there frozen, bat trembling in my hands, listening. Then came the whisper. "I know you're in there." My knees almost gave out. The voice was low, male, steady, too calm. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. The knob turned harder this time, the door shaking in its frame. I pressed my back against the wall, whispering into the phone, begging the dispatcher to hurry. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The footsteps retreated, moving through the house, growing fainter. Then the sound of the back door again, squeaking open, then slamming shut. I stayed in that room until the deputy arrived. He searched the house, found the back door wide open, but nothing else. Whoever it was, they were gone. For weeks I couldn't sleep. Every creak made me jump. I replaced the locks, bought extra bolts, even set up a cheap camera by the door. 2 nights later, I checked the footage. At 2:14 a.m., the motion light clicked on. A man stood in my yard, just beyond the camera's focus. Tall, wearing a hood, face hidden. He stood there for 5 minutes, not moving, just staring at the house. Then he turned and walked away. I don't live there anymore. I couldn't, but I still think about that whisper outside my bedroom door. The calm certainty in his voice when he said he knew I was there. Because the truth is, he was right. And if he knew that much, maybe he knew more. Like where I worked, where I shopped, where I moved to after I left. I used to think nothing truly bad ever happened in my small town. We had our share of break-ins, a few bar fights, but nothing that felt like the kind of stories you hear on the news. That belief was shattered one night when I came close to not making it out alive. I was 29 at the time, living alone on the edge of town. My house wasn't far from an old gravel pit that had been abandoned years ago. As kids, we used to sneak out there, daring each other to climb the steep walls or throw rocks into the water that collected at the bottom. It was dangerous, but to us it was just another playground. By the time this happened, I barely thought about the place anymore. It was just another quiet part of town I drove past without a second thought. But one night, around 11, I came home from a late shift at work and noticed a car I didn't recognize parked halfway down the road. Nothing unusual about a car at night, but what caught my attention was how it was sitting there with the lights off, engine off, and no one moving inside. I figured maybe it was a couple of teenagers looking for a place to hang out, so I went inside and didn't think much of it. I showered, made a quick sandwich, and sat down in front of the TV. Maybe 40 minutes later, I heard something outside, a metallic clang. I froze, sandwich in hand. It wasn't the sound of a car door or someone walking. It sounded like a shovel hitting the ground. At first I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe a raccoon knocking something over. But then it came again, steady, rhythmic, metal striking dirt. I turned off the TV and sat in the silence. The sound was faint but real. Shovel, dirt, shovel, dirt. I walked over to the window and looked out toward the gravel pit. That's when I noticed a faint light bobbing around in the distance, like someone holding a flashlight. The sound carried through the still night air, shovel digging into earth. Every hair on my body stood on end. What the hell was someone doing digging in the middle of the night by the pit? I pulled the curtains shut, heart pounding. My mind was racing with possibilities. Maybe some drunk kids burying alcohol. Maybe someone hiding stolen stuff. But the longer I sat there listening, the more wrong it felt. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to hide the noise. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my jacket and slipped out the back door. I told myself I'd just take a peek, nothing more. The moonlight gave me enough to see without using my phone flashlight. I crept along the edge of the property toward where the digging sounds echoed. As I got closer, I crouched low and peered through the brush. That's when I saw him, a man in dark clothing, sleeves rolled up, sweating under the beam of a single lantern. He was digging a deep hole in the dirt, his movements quick and frantic, like he was racing against time. Beside the hole was a long bundle wrapped in a tarp. I felt my stomach turn. It was human-shaped. I staggered back, stepping on a twig. The snap was louder than a gunshot in that silence. The man froze mid-swing and slowly turned his head. I ducked down and held my breath, my chest heaving. For what felt like forever, he just stood there, scanning the trees. Finally, he went back to digging, but his pace was quicker now, almost frantic. I didn't stick around to see more. I bolted back to my house, locked every door, and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking so bad it took me 3 tries to dial 911. The dispatcher kept me calm while I explained what I saw. A deputy was sent out, and I waited by the window, every muscle tense. I could still faintly hear the shovel hitting dirt. When the patrol car finally pulled up, its headlights washed over the area near the pit. But by then, the lantern was gone, the man was gone, and so was the bundle. The only thing left was a half-dug hole and fresh dirt scattered everywhere. The deputy shined his light around, even called for backup, but there was nothing else to find. No tire tracks, no footprints clear enough to follow. Just that unfinished grave. They told me I probably interrupted whatever he was doing. Maybe I even saved a life that night. But the truth is, no body was ever found, no one was ever arrested, and the case never went anywhere. For weeks I barely slept. Every sound outside made me think he had come back. That car I'd seen earlier that night haunted me. Was he sitting there watching me before he started digging? Was I supposed to be the one in that tarp? I'll never know for sure. But even now, when I pass by that gravel pit, I can still hear the sound in my head. Shovel, dirt, shovel, dirt. And I know someone out there remembers me just as well as I remember him. I've lived in the same small town my whole life. People here know each other's families, their jobs, their business, sometimes even more than you'd like. Most nights are quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear the train miles before it passes through. That's what makes the night I'm about to tell you about so hard to forget. Because here, when something breaks the quiet, it never feels right. It started on a late Friday evening in the fall. I had worked a long shift at the diner, washing dishes after hours because the kid who was supposed to close didn't show. I was tired, smelling like grease and soap, and all I wanted was to get home. The problem was, my car had been acting up for weeks, and that night, it finally gave up on me. I was halfway home when the engine sputtered, coughed, and shut down near the tracks on the edge of town. There aren't many lights in that part of town, just one flickering street lamp and the blinking red signals for the crossing. The diner was a mile behind me, my apartment about another 2 miles down the road. Normally I'd call someone, but my phone had barely any battery left, and no signal in that spot. It was just me, the dead car, and the quiet stretch of road by the railroad tracks. I figured I'd lock the car and walk. It wasn't the first time, but almost as soon as I stepped out, I noticed something across the tracks. A shape. A man standing under the streetlight. He wasn't moving, just watching. At first, I thought maybe it was just another person waiting for the late train, but the longer I looked, the stranger it felt. He wasn't pacing or checking a phone. He wasn't doing anything but standing there, too still, like he was waiting for me. I told myself not to be paranoid. People pass through sometimes, maybe walking home from the bar on Main. But something about him froze me. His clothes looked worn, his jacket too thin for the cold, and I swear I could see his eyes catching the light, even from that distance. I decided to start walking anyway. Small towns breed paranoia, and I wasn't about to stand around in the dark feeding mine. I pulled my bag over my shoulder, locked the car, and started down the road. The thing is, as I walked, I could hear him. The shuffle of shoes across gravel. I glanced back, and sure enough, he was following me. Same side of the tracks now, a few dozen feet back. My pace quickened. So did his. I didn't run at first. Running makes things real, makes them escalate. But when I turned onto the side road that leads to my apartment, he turned too. That's when my stomach knotted, and I started moving fast. By the time I reached the row of old houses near the edge of town, I was almost jogging. I looked back once more. He was closer now. Close enough that I could see his hands. One gripped something, a pipe maybe, or a crowbar. That's when I ran. I cut between two houses, hoping to lose him. My boots slapped the cracked pavement as I darted across backyards. Dogs barked, porch lights flicked on, but no one came outside. In small towns, people mind their business at night. I reached the alley behind my apartment and fumbled with my keys. I was shaking so hard I dropped them. When I bent to grab them, I heard the sound of fast footsteps on the pavement behind me. I didn't look. I shoved the key into the lock, slammed the door behind me, and twisted the deadbolt. For a moment, I thought I was safe. My heart was pounding, ears ringing. Then came the sound, soft at first, then harder. Someone testing the knob. Then a slow drag of metal against the door. I backed away, clutching my phone, even though it was nearly dead. I dialed 911, it rang, and I prayed the battery would hold. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man outside my apartment, I whispered. He followed me from the tracks. He has something in his hand, I think a weapon. Please, you need to send someone. The operator told me to stay on the line, to stay calm, that officers were on the way. But the banging started, louder this time. He was hitting the door with that pipe or crowbar, trying to break it down. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I owned, and crouched by the hallway. I kept whispering to the operator, my voice shaking, listening to the thuds as the door rattled in its frame. Minutes felt like hours, then silence. I didn't know if that was better or worse. The operator kept asking if I was still there, but I barely heard her. I strained my ears. Nothing. No footsteps, no banging, no breathing. Just silence. I thought maybe he'd gone. Maybe the sound of sirens scared him off. But when the police finally arrived and knocked, I didn't move right away. I couldn't. My hands wouldn't let go of the knife. They had to talk me into opening the door. When I finally did, two officers swept through the place, checking every corner, every shadow. They didn't find him. Not inside, not outside. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. One of the officers called me over to the window by the kitchen. There on the glass was a handprint, clear as day, pressed against the pane. It wasn't from inside. It was from outside. The cops never found him. They said maybe he was just some drifter passing through, maybe someone high or desperate. But drifters don't usually know where you live. For weeks after, I barely slept. Every creak of the building, every car passing outside, made me sit up in bed gripping that knife. I kept seeing his shape under the streetlight, waiting, too still, like he had been standing there just for me. And sometimes, late at night when the train passes through, I catch myself looking toward the tracks. I swear I see him there still. I grew up in a small town where nothing much ever happened. Most nights were quiet enough that you could hear an owl hoot or the wind rustling through the trees. That's why the night I nearly didn't make it out alive still sticks with me. I was 28 and had just moved into a small house on the outskirts of town. The property backed up to a patch of woods that locals called the Hollow. It was nothing more than a dense stretch of pines and oaks that ran for miles behind the far end of town. Kids sometimes dared each other to run through it after dark, but most adults avoided it. That night, I was walking home from my shift at the grocery store. My car had died a few blocks away, so I had no choice but to hoof it. The streetlights ended about halfway down my road, and after that, the Hollow's shadow stretched across the road like a black blanket. I wasn't worried at first. I'd walked this way hundreds of times, but the deeper I got, the quieter it became. Even the usual night sounds, crickets, wind, seemed muted. I started to feel it, the sense that someone was watching me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just nerves. But then I heard a footstep behind me. One. I froze. Another step. Closer. I turned quickly. Nothing. I told myself to keep moving. Fast, but not panicked. My phone had barely any signal, so calling anyone wasn't an option. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Not in front, not in the trees, but directly behind me, matching my pace. My stomach dropped. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to hide it. They wanted me to know. I started jogging, trying not to trip over the roots and rocks hidden in the shadows. The footsteps accelerated too. Whoever it was, they were faster than me. Panic hit me like a wall. I veered into the woods, hoping I could use the trees to hide. Branches whipped at my face, but I didn't care. My heart was pounding, my lungs burning, my entire body screaming to get away. Then I tripped. I fell hard, scraping my hands and knees on the dirt. I looked up, heart in my throat, and saw him. A man. Tall, thin, dressed in dark clothing that blended into the night. His face was half hidden under a hood, but I could see his eyes. They were fixed on me. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't know where I was going, just deeper into the hollow, twisting and turning between trees, praying I wouldn't get lost. The man followed. I could hear him breathing, the snap of twigs under his boots, the quiet swish of his jacket against the brush. After what felt like forever, I spotted a clearing up ahead. A road ran along the far side. I sprinted toward it, bursting out of the woods and into the faint light of the street lamps. The man stopped at the tree line. He didn't chase me into the open. He just stood there, watching, like a predator that knew its prey had escaped, for now. I ran straight to my house, slammed the door behind me, and locked every bolt. I called the sheriff and explained everything, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing. No footprints that could be tracked, no sign of the man in the woods. For weeks afterward, I didn't leave my property after dark. I installed motion lights, bought a big dog, and slept with my bedroom door locked. But every time the wind rustled the trees behind my house, I imagined him out there, waiting, watching, ready to strike. Years later, I still avoid walking near the hollow at night. The memory of that man, the way he didn't need to speak, the way he just followed silently, stays with me. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, in the shadows behind someone else's house, choosing his next target. And that thought, more than anything else, keeps me awake at night. I always thought living on the edge of the woods would be peaceful. My parents moved us out there when I was 15, trading in the noise of the suburbs for what they called fresh air and quiet nights. Quiet nights, sure. But nobody warned me that quiet could feel dangerous. The house sat at the end of a narrow gravel road, half hidden behind a line of tall pines. To one side was our backyard and the tree line. To the other, nothing but forest stretching for miles. Our nearest neighbor was half a mile down the road. At night, when the wind moved through the trees, it felt like the whole forest was leaning in, listening. That fall, I was 17, old enough that my parents trusted me to stay home alone while they went to visit my aunt a few towns over. They left on a Saturday morning, planning to be back by Sunday afternoon. "You'll be fine," my mom said, patting my shoulder. "Just lock up at night and don't stay up too late." I smiled, nodded, played the part of the responsible kid. But secretly, I was excited. A whole night alone, no parents, no rules, just me, the fridge, and Netflix. The day passed easily enough. I played video games, made myself a stack of grilled cheese sandwiches, and lounged around in sweatpants. The woods outside were calm, a little too still, but I didn't pay much attention. It wasn't until around 10:30 that things started to feel wrong. I was lying on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it, a sharp crack outside, like a branch snapping under weight. At first I ignored it. Animals were always moving around out there, deer, raccoons, even the occasional stray dog. But then I heard it again, closer this time. Snap. I muted the TV, sitting up slowly. The sound came from the backyard, near the tree line. I held my breath, straining to hear. Silence. I exhaled, laughing nervously at myself. "It's just a deer," I whispered. Saying it out loud made it easier to believe. I got up, peeked through the blinds. The yard was dark, the only light spilling from the back porch bulb. Beyond it, the trees stood like a wall, black against the night sky. Nothing moved. I shook my head, told myself I was being paranoid, and went back to the couch. 10 minutes later, I heard it again. This time it wasn't a snap, it was a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the back door. I froze. My stomach dropped. Nobody ever came to the back door. Not even delivery guys. If someone was knocking there, it wasn't a neighbor. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling more than I wanted it to. No answer. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. I stood, every instinct screaming not to go closer, but my feet carried me toward the kitchen anyway. The back door had a window, covered by a thin curtain. My hand hovered just inches from it, my heart pounding. "Don't look," I told myself, "don't." But I had to. I pulled the curtain aside just a fraction and saw nothing. Just the porch, empty under the weak yellow light. I let out a shaky breath, dropping the curtain. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe the wind had rattled something. I turned to walk away and froze again. On the glass just at eye level were 3 smeared fingerprints. Fresh, as if someone had pressed their hand against the window and dragged it down slowly. My mouth went dry. I backed away, knife from the counter clutched in my shaking hand. That's when the phone rang, the landline. We hardly ever used it. I jumped at the sound, staring at it like it was about to bite me. After the second ring, I picked it up, pressing it to my ear with a trembling hand. Silence. Then, breathing, low, steady, deliberate. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice cracking. The breathing grew louder. Click. The line went dead. I dropped the phone, my chest heaving. My mind raced. Should I call the cops? But what would I even say? Someone knocked on my door and breathed into the phone? They'd think I was overreacting. The house suddenly felt too big, too open. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. I turned off the TV, the lamp, everything. Sat in the dark, knife in hand, listening. Around midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, steady, crunching across the backyard. I crept to the window, lifting the curtain just a sliver. And there he was, a figure standing at the tree line. Tall, motionless, watching the house. I dropped the curtain like it was on fire, stumbling back. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The footsteps came closer. I could hear them now, deliberate, heavy, one after another. I backed into the living room, fumbling for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher answered, calm and steady, but my words tumbled out in a rush. "Someone's outside, my backyard, knocking, watching, please hurry." She told me to stay on the line, stay inside, stay calm. Officers were on their way. The footsteps stopped. The silence was worse. Then, tap, 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 on the living room window. I turned slowly, every muscle rigid. Through the thin curtain, I saw the faintest shadow. A hand pressed against the glass, fingers spreading wide. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The dispatcher's voice was distant in my ear. "Stay calm, stay where you are, help is coming." The hand slid slowly down the glass, leaving a streak. Then, it was gone. I waited, trembling, listening to the silence press in around me. Seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, red and blue lights flashed across the walls. The pounding on the door this time was the police. By the time they searched the yard, whoever it was had vanished. No footprints, no sign of forced entry, nothing but the fingerprints on the glass, too smudged to trace. The officers told me it was probably a prank, some local kids messing around. But I saw the size of that hand. It wasn't a kid. And the worst part, I never saw his face. Just the shadow, the breathing, the slow, deliberate knocks. And now, even years later, whenever I'm home alone at night and hear the trees creak outside, I wonder, is he still out there? Waiting? Watching? It started with the phone call. Not the ring itself. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the silence on the other end. I'd been home alone for only a few hours when it happened. My roommate had gone out for the night, leaving me with the apartment to myself. It wasn't unusual. I liked the quiet sometimes. I was halfway through reheating leftovers when the phone rang. I answered without thinking, one hand still on the microwave. "Hello?" Nothing. "Hello?" I repeated, louder this time. Still silence. Then click. The line went dead. I shrugged it off as a wrong number, though something about the emptiness of it stuck with me. I set my plate down and tried to forget it, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being listened to. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, all in an old building with thin walls and a hallway that always smelled faintly of dust and cigarette smoke. Normally, the familiarity of it was comforting. That night, it felt claustrophobic. I turned on the TV for background noise, settling onto the couch. About 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I hesitated, then picked up. This time I heard breathing. Low, slow, definite. "Who is this?" I demanded. Silence. "Listen, if this is some kind of joke." Click. My skin prickled. I stared at the screen, but the number wasn't saved, just unknown. I tried to brush it off, but my eyes kept darting toward the windows. The curtains were drawn, but suddenly I was very aware of how thin they were, how easy it would be for someone to stand just outside watching. I locked the door, double-checked the chain, made sure the windows were latched. Still, the unease crawled under my skin. At 10:15, the phone rang again. Same number. Against my better judgment, I answered, this time a whisper. "I can see you." I shot to my feet, heart pounding. "Who the hell is this?" No answer, just breathing. Then, click. My hands shook as I dialed back. Straight to voicemail. No name, no details, just a robotic message. "The number you are trying to reach is not available." I told myself it was probably a prank, someone messing around. But how did they know my number? And why tonight, of all nights, when I was alone? I killed the lights in the living room, leaving only the glow of the TV. Maybe if it looked like I wasn't home, they'd stop. Around 11, I heard it, the faintest knock at the door, not the sharp rap of a visitor. This was slow, deliberate, a single knock, a pause, then another. I froze in the dark, staring at the door. My phone was in my hand before I realized it. I didn't call anyone, though. I just held it like a lifeline, waiting. The knocking stopped. I edged toward the peephole, hesitating. Every horror movie screamed at me not to look, but I had to. I pressed my eye to the glass. Nothing. The hallway outside was empty, just the dim yellow light flickering overhead. I let out a shaky laugh, my breath fogging the peephole. Maybe it was the neighbors. Maybe some kid thought it'd be funny to knock and run. I turned away and froze. On the floor, just under the doorframe, was a slip of paper. I bent down slowly, my stomach tightening. The paper was folded, no markings on the outside. My hands trembled as I picked it up and unfolded it. 4 words, scrawled in black ink, "You shouldn't be alone." I dropped it like it burned me, stumbling back. My pulse hammered in my ears. This wasn't a prank. Someone was here. Someone knew. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. My voice shook as I explained, told them about the calls, the note, the knocks. The dispatcher was calm, said officers were on their way. I sat on the couch clutching the phone, staring at the door, the slip of paper still lying there like a threat. 5 minutes, 10, 15. No police. Instead, another knock, louder this time, harder. I screamed, "The cops are coming." Silence. Then, through the door, so faint I almost thought I imagined it, came a whisper. "I know." I stumbled back, tripping over the coffee table, my heart ready to burst. I dialed 911 again, begging them to hurry, but they said officers were already dispatched. Another knock, another whisper. "Let me in." I bolted for my room, locking the door, shoving a chair under the handle like it was some flimsy shield. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and shallow, echoing in the silence. Then came the sound of the front door handle rattling, hard, again and again. Someone was trying to force it. I clutched the phone so tight my knuckles went white, whispering to the dispatcher, "They're trying to break in." "Stay where you are," she said firmly. "Officers are almost there." The rattling stopped. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd gone. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving away from the front door, toward my bedroom. I froze, every muscle locked. The footsteps creaked across the floorboards, closer, closer. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Then, scratching. At my bedroom door, not banging, not kicking, scratching, like nails dragging across the wood, testing it. My heart nearly gave out. I pressed myself against the farthest wall, knife in hand, phone against my ear. Then, sirens. Faint at first, then closer, wailing through the night. The scratching stopped. The footsteps retreated. Fast this time, pounding toward the front. I heard the door slam, heard the echo of running down the hall. When the police burst in moments later, they found nothing. The door was still locked, the hallway empty, no sign of forced entry. Just me, pale and shaking, clutching a knife and a phone with the dispatcher still on the line. They searched the building, checked the security cameras. Nothing, no one. But on my coffee table, lying exactly where I'd left it, was the slip of paper. "You shouldn't be alone." They took it as evidence, but I never got an explanation. No name, no suspect, nothing. And even now, years later, I can still hear that whisper in my head. I don't know if you've ever stayed completely alone in a house at night and suddenly realized just how many noises a building can make when no one's around. It's like the walls start talking, the pipes sigh, the floorboards creak like they've been waiting for an audience. That night, it wasn't just the usual random creaks. It felt like the house had secrets it wanted to spill, and I was the only one around to hear them. My parents had gone out of town for a wedding, and since I had work early the next morning, I'd convinced them I'd be fine at home. "I'm not a kid anymore," I'd said, brushing off my mother's usual worry. And I wasn't. I was 23. Still, I couldn't deny the feeling of emptiness when they left. The house was too quiet, too hollow. It was around 9:30 when I settled into the couch with a leftover slice of pizza and Netflix humming in the background. The street outside was calm. We lived in one of those neighborhoods where nothing much ever happens, rows of modest houses, the occasional bark of a dog, the distant hum of a car now and then. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. Too peaceful. About halfway through the second episode of whatever I was binge watching, I heard it. A faint knock. Not the doorbell. A knock. Soft, deliberate from the back door. I froze. Nobody ever came to the back door. Delivery guys, neighbors, friends, they all used the front. And besides, we had no reason for anyone to be visiting at that hour. My first thought was maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was something on the show. I muted the TV, held my breath, and waited. Silence. I shook my head, chuckling nervously to myself. Get a grip. I turned the sound back on, louder this time. 10 minutes later, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was clearer, sharper, and undeniably from the back door. My skin prickled. I paused the TV, stood up slowly, and tiptoed to the kitchen, where I could see the glass of the back door from a distance. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint outline of movement, a shifting shadow. Someone was standing there. I swallowed hard. My instinct was to grab my phone and call my parents, but what would that do? They were 3 hours away. My second thought was the police, but what would I even tell them? That someone knocked on my door? I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe they needed something. I cleared my throat and called out, trying to sound casual. "Who's there?" Silence. The shadow shifted again, and then nothing. No response. No retreating footsteps. Just gone. My heart was hammering as I stood there, staring at the curtain, waiting for any sign of movement. Finally, after what felt like forever, I stepped forward and pulled the curtain aside just a crack. Nobody. The backyard was empty. The grass swayed gently in the breeze. The fence cast long shadows under the streetlight, but there was no one at the door. I told myself it had to be my imagination. Maybe a branch had tapped the glass. Maybe I'd mistaken the shadows. I forced a laugh, locked the door, and double-checked it just in case. But I couldn't shake the unease. I went back to the living room, this time turning off the TV completely. The quiet was unbearable, but I needed to listen. At around 11, just as I was starting to convince myself everything was fine, I heard something worse. The sound of the side gate squeaking. That gate only squeaked when it was opened. I froze in the middle of the room, straining to hear. My mind raced. What if someone was trying to get in? Should I turn off the lights and pretend I wasn't home? Should I grab something heavy and arm myself? I grabbed the nearest thing at hand, a fireplace poker, and crept toward the kitchen again. The curtains at the back door still hung heavy, but this time I didn't dare move them. I just stood there, ears straining. Then I heard it. Faint footsteps on the porch. And then, unbelievably, the quiet rattle of the doorknob. Someone was trying to get in. My breath caught. I backed away slowly, phone shaking in my hand as I finally dialed 911. My voice trembled as I whispered into the receiver. "There's someone at my back door. I think they're trying to break in." The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady. She told me to stay on the line, to stay somewhere safe, that officers were on their way. The rattling stopped, silence again. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. Then came the knock. Louder this time. 3 heavy thuds that echoed through the house. I nearly dropped the phone. "Are they inside?" the dispatcher asked. "No," I whispered. "Not yet." "Stay where you are. Don't engage. The police are on their way." I crouched low, clutching the poker, staring at the door as if my eyes could burn holes through the curtain. I heard the footsteps again, retreating slowly across the porch, then fading. For a few minutes, there was nothing, just silence. Then came a sound I'll never forget, the creak of the front door. I spun around. I knew I'd locked it. I was sure of it, but in my panic earlier, had I really? The dispatcher was still in my ear. "Where are you now?" They're at the front," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. I crept toward the hall, the house eerily still, my every step sounding too loud. Then I heard it, the faintest scrape, like a key or tool sliding against the lock. Someone was picking my front door. I could hardly breathe. The dispatcher told me to stay quiet, stay hidden, that officers were close. But all I could think about was that flimsy lock giving way. And then, mercifully, I saw the flash of blue and red lights wash across the front window. The sound of a car pulling up, doors slamming, voices calling out. The scraping at the lock stopped instantly. Footsteps pounded away, retreating fast. By the time the officers burst onto my porch, whoever had been there was gone. They searched the yard, the street, even the alley. Nothing. Whoever it was had vanished into the night. The police stayed with me for nearly an hour, checking locks, walking me through safety tips, telling me it was probably an attempted burglary. "You were lucky," one of them said. "If you hadn't called when you did..." He didn't finish the sentence. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with every light in the house blazing, the fireplace poker still in my hand, listening to the silence press in on me. And the worst part? I never found out who it was. No arrests, no leads. Just the memory of that shadow at my back door, the rattle of the knob, the heavy knock that still echoes in my head when I'm alone at night. I've stayed home alone plenty of times since then, but it's never the same. Every creak feels louder, every shadow deeper. I triple-check every lock, every window. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you see. It's knowing that someone out there once tried to come in, and you'll never know why. I grew up in a town so small that most people who drove through it didn't even know they'd passed it. There wasn't much to market except a single gas station, a handful of old houses, and the train tracks that ran right along the edge of town. When I was 25, I moved back there for a while after a bad breakup. My mom still lived in one of those creaky houses near the tracks, and she let me crash until I got back on my feet. Nights in that town were different from anywhere else I'd been, quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that made every little noise stand out, like the rustling of leaves or a dog barking 3 blocks away. One night in late September, I was driving home from my job at a diner in the next town over. It was just after midnight, the kind of night where the air feels colder than it should. The 2-lane road leading back was dark, no streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the trees on either side. About halfway down that road sits an old crossing where the train rarely runs anymore. They keep the warning lights up, but I hadn't seen a train come through at night in years. As I approached, I noticed something that made me ease off the gas. A truck was parked right on the side of the road, close to the tracks. It was an old beat-up Ford, paint rusted through in spots, the kind of truck that looks like it should have been scrapped years ago. Its headlights were off, but I could see the outline in the glow of my beams. I slowed as I got closer, trying to see if someone was inside. At first it looked empty, but then I caught the faintest movement, a figure sitting in the driver's seat. I drove past, telling myself it was probably just some guy who pulled over to rest. Happens all the time out there. But when I glanced in my rearview mirror, the truck's headlights clicked on. My stomach tightened. I kept driving, telling myself not to be paranoid. Maybe the guy was just getting back on the road. Except he pulled out right after me, his lights washing over the back of my car. I pressed the gas a little harder, the road narrowing as it wound closer to town. He stayed behind me, not too close, but close enough that I knew he was matching my speed. The thing is, in a place that small, you learn the normal rhythm of cars at night. You know who's likely heading home, whose headlights you recognize, even which roads people usually turn down. This truck didn't belong to anyone I knew, and he didn't turn when he should have. He stayed with me. By the time I reached the edge of town, every nerve in my body was on edge. I didn't want to pull straight into my mom's driveway with him behind me, so I decided to keep driving past, circle around, and see if he'd stay on me. He did. Block after block, every turn I made, his headlights followed. At one point, I slowed almost to a stop at a four-way, hoping he'd pass. He didn't. He just crept behind me like he had nowhere else to be. Finally, I turned onto the narrow road that led back toward the tracks again, thinking maybe I could lose him. The road was darker there, no houses, just woods and the train line. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Halfway down that stretch, I saw his truck suddenly speed up. The beams grew larger in my mirror. I gripped the wheel tighter, telling myself not to panic, but then he swerved closer. His front bumper almost touched mine. I slammed the gas pedal, my old sedan rattling as it pushed faster than it liked. He stayed right there, practically nudging me forward. I thought for sure he was about to ram me. Up ahead, the railroad crossing loomed. The warning lights weren't flashing, no train in sight, but I had a split second to make a choice. Cross and hope my car didn't stall, or hit the brakes and pray he'd overshoot me. I chose to cross. I barreled over the tracks, my tires thudding hard enough to jolt my teeth. In the mirror, I saw the truck slow just before the crossing. He didn't follow. He just stopped there, idling, his headlights casting long beams across the road. I didn't dare slow down. I kept driving until I reached the diner's parking lot back in the next town, even though it was closed. I sat there shaking, staring at the empty road, trying to make sense of what just happened. The next day I told my mom. She said people used to talk about strange things happening out by those tracks. Cars being followed, folks seeing men standing near the crossing late at night. I'd always thought they were just stories, the kind of small-town rumors people tell to pass the time. But I knew what I'd seen. That truck, that driver, whoever he wasn't just some guy pulling over for a nap. He was waiting. And for some reason, he chose me.